it, and they've got it, and they're going to fight over it, because if you look at the whole situation over the last 20 years, they don't have much else to fight over.
And of course what you're talking about is the incident in which another prisoner squirted water at Leslie Van Houten, or I'm sorry, at Patricia Krenwinkle, and then had a look of fear on her face, and Patricia Krenwinkle laughed. Is that what you think they're pouncing on here?
I'm sure they're pouncing on that. There are some other statements in there which I have objected to because I consider them to be defamatory, so I'm not going to go into those either.
What about parole plans? If your client gets out of prison after all these years, what are her plans?
That is something else that we're not discussing about openly. It's a type of thing. I mean, let's face it. You know you're going to go before the Board of Prison Terms. You know there is a high probability you're going to get turned down. And it's real difficult to walk in and say, yes, I now have a job offer from McDonnell Douglas to be a clerk someplace, you know, in their Fontana office, or just, you know, you pick something. I'm going to Kmart and I'm going to be a cashier.
Does she have any idea of what she would want to do?
There are plans. There are definite, specific plans. We're just not broadcasting at this time because we don't think it's, well, we've got 5 years according to them, unless of course we went on our appeal.
And do those plans include a possible job and a place to live in which you stay in Southern California?
They include a possible job and a place to stay and live.
Okay. Now, it seemed as if it was your decision not to have Patricia Krenwinkle here at this hearing. Do you think that that hurt her, and what was her opinion on this? Did she want to come?
Well, I'm certainly not going to discuss some of our attorney-client privilege discussions. I can say generally that, as I stated to the board, that it was a decision that I felt was the best thing to do. And honestly, I had been encouraged by Stephen Kay that this probably would be continued. As a courtesy, I called him in advance, told him I would be requesting a continuance, and he seemed to believe that normally continuances are granted and there wouldn't be that much problem to it. So I went in with a very positive attitude, and why have all these people lined up to sit in there when the response I was receiving, including from Mr. Rich in Sacramento, he said he would not continue it and that I would have to appear before the board to request a continuance. That's what I did, with the incorrect assumption that they would put it over.
And just finally here, any hope in your mind that your client will ever walk free?
I would venture to say that with the political climate as it is, with the parole board basically ignoring a lot of the requirements there are on why somebody should be released on parole, I don't see anything in the near future coming up. I think it's a shame because nobody has really talked about what has happened to Patricia in the last 28 years and why it started out, yes, it was a horrendous crime, but everybody's a victim, including Patricia, when you're looking at the fact that Charles Manson acted in a manner to convince people, hey, you need to go out and do this for me because I'm this wonderful, powerful person. You get away from that, you get away from the drugs, and it's actually possible to become a good, responsible person in the community and in society. I think it's a waste.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, Gregg and Rikki, that was Wendy Park, who represents Patricia Krenwinkle, has been doing so for the past 10 years, but it looks as though Patricia Krenwinkle's own attorney doesn't even see the hope of her getting out of prison. She points out that the political climate is against her. Of course, California, even all these years later, 28 years later, still reeling from these crimes.
All right. Mary Jane Stevenson, thanks very much for that update. Once again, Patricia Krenwinkle's bid, her 10th bid for parole, has been denied, and she doesn't get another shot at freedom for 5 long years. When we come back, we'll take a look both at the Charles Manson hearing and somebody else who was once very close to Krenwinkle, Leslie Van Houten. She, according to many observers, really does have a legitimate chance at freedom. In a moment. Welcome back to Court TV. I'm Gregg Jarrett.
And I'm Rikki Klieman. There were brutal killings, a media frenzy, and a murder trial that captivated the nation. It was 1969, the year of Woodstock, the first moonwalk, and Charles Manson, who led his followers on a killing spree that shocked the nation. Despite the death sentence received 25 years ago, Charles Manson is 58 years old at the time of his last parole hearing, April 21st, 1992. The California Parole Board had to decide if he's a relic from the age of Aquarius who has done his time, or a man without remorse who remains a danger to society.
I'm an outlaw. They're right there, you know, and I'm a gangster, and I'm bad, and I'm all the things that I want to be. I'm pretty free within myself. I cut people, and I shoot them, and I do whatever I have to do to survive in the world I live in.
This isn't what most inmates would say to a parole board. But then again, most inmates aren't Charles Manson. The 60s cult leader is best known for ordering his followers to take part in a murderous rampage the weekend of August 9th, 1969. That Saturday night, Manson's so-called family members attacked the Bel Air home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband, director Roman Polanski.
People came around me because I played a lot of music, and I was fairly free and open because I really didn't know, honestly. Everyone says that I was the leader of those people, but I was actually a follower of the children because, like, I never grew up.
5 people were killed that night, including Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant at the time. The following night, 2 more were killed by Manson family members. It was 26 years ago that Manson and 3 of his followers went on trial. Paul Fitzgerald defended Manson follower Patricia Krenwinkle.
It got so that you never knew what was going to happen every day, but you knew some peculiar thing was going to happen.
Many of us don't remember the courtroom chaos that took place a quarter century ago.
Manson crawls up on the counsel table and in one leap and with a sharp pencil gets but a few inches, maybe a foot or so away from the judge.
Manson became eligible for parole in 1978. By law, he must have a parole hearing a minimum of every 5 years. The most recent in 1992.
Manson is a man that's at home in jail. They can do nothing more to him. And he just uses this parole process to taunt, just like he did during the course of the trial, to turn it on its head, to use it as a forum to espouse his incredible foolishness.
Although Manson is entitled to an attorney, he represents himself. The first area the board goes into is called the incident offense. In other words, the crimes Manson has committed.
If you look in your own mind, for every point, there's a counterpoint. For every red, there's a black. For every black, there's a red. In other words, what you're making me into in your reports so that you can write your books and do your Rambo trips and make your movies for public entertainment is not really what happened. And what happened could have been explained, but if you will allow me to call a witness.
No. But the board does not allow that. Instead, the board continues to press Manson about the crime. Did he order his followers to kill?
I know what I would say now, and I don't lie, so I know what I would say then. You know, and I certainly wouldn't tell nobody to go in and do nothing to anybody that I wouldn't want done to me. Okay. I got it. Listen. I got enough sense to know that if I spit on you, that gives you the God-given right to spit on me back. Anything I do to you, you got the right to do right back to me, and I'm not going to get caught up in that.
The next area the board delves into is called prior criminality. Manson's criminal record before the murders. He's asked about his drug use.
I've taken a few tabs of acid. I smoke grass. I've smoked a little hash. I don't mess with drugs per se. I don't do anything that's self-destructive. I like the cactus buds, their spiritual experience. And
peyote?
The mushrooms are okay.
Yeah.
I drink Scotch whiskey. I like Scotch whiskey. I drink beer occasionally. I'm not much of a wine drinker, but now and then some wine with the meals, all right?
Do you get any of that in here?
No. I'm working on a zoo project for the ecology. I got frogs and I got hawks and turtles.
Well, Manson's animal pictures don't much interest the board, which instead turns to his post-conviction factors, Manson's behavior in prison. The former cult leader has many disciplinary reports against him, including an incident of spitting at a female guard.
I live in a patriarch. You live in a matriarch. You back up to your women. I don't back up to my women. I don't take no lip from my women. I don't give them none, but I don't take none either. If they disrespect me, I'll disrespect them back. If they hit me, I'll hit them back.
The board presses Manson for a better explanation of what happened, and Manson's psychological problems began to emerge.
The turnaround comes to push, push comes to shove. Shove comes to looking around and see where you're up above or down below, where you're at and how it turns. Something that says it's good, says it's bad, that's good. Say what it is, that's cool. So when you gets cool and you got some fool coming through the door, you don't know what he's doing about what. He just come and fell out of the water like a fish on the floor. And he don't know what he's doing, he got no idea where he's at, and he's coming into other people's lives talking about words he don't even know nothing about. Then he comes into my world, my life, and tells me, roo, some old punk ass that's going to get me killed if I don't put up some force fields in his mind and get his ding-dong ass off me. So I tell him, get off me. If you don't get off me, I'll teach you how to get off me.
The next area the board goes into is Manson's plans if paroled. Where would he go? Does he have parents who would take him in?
I'd like to explain. I really would.
You don't have to. I'm just asking.
But I mean, I really want to. I really want to.
The question is, you have folks.
But you don't understand. Each one of you is somebody. I am nobody. I'm nothing.
Well, Charles Manson is, to say the least, a murderous piece of work. So why does he get to do this? Well, California law mandates that prisoners get a parole hearing 13 months before they've served the minimum sentence. That happens to be the law in California. And then at least every 5 years thereafter, sometimes a lot sooner. And after that, it really depends on the crime and, of course, the prisoner. So at this 1992 parole hearing, Charles Manson continues to deliver his closing remarks before the board as he tries to convince them to set him free.
I'm right with my God, and I'm right with myself, and I didn't break the law. I didn't break God's law, and I didn't break man's law.
Charles Manson doesn't think he broke the law, but this man, Stephen Kay, certainly does. The deputy district attorney has made something of a career of Charles Manson. Not only has he been to the parole hearings of Manson and many of his former followers, he also helped prosecute Manson 25 years ago.
Charles Manson told his followers that Adolf Hitler was his hero, and he tried to emulate him. We can see even today he still has a swastika on his forehead. Can we ever risk setting a man like Charles Manson free in society, a man who, in essence, tried to destroy our society? I think not. I would respectfully ask the board to find Mr. Manson unsuitable for parole and to give him the maximum 5-year denial. Thank you very much.
And then Charles Manson gives his unsettling closing remarks.
If I'm not paroled,
Okay.
and I don't get a chance to get back up on top of this dream, you're going to lose all your money. Your farms ain't going to produce. You're going to win, helter skelter. You're going to win your reality. You're going to get everything that you want right from the pages of that court. That's going to be your reality, and you're coming. You're growing up, and you're going to be there just like you want him to be there. That's where he's coming, because that's what you're making for yourself.
All right, we're going to recess for deliberation. We'll call you back after we make a decision.
It takes the 3-member panel only 20 minutes to return with its decision.
The prisoner is not suitable for parole and would pose an unreasonable risk of danger to society if released at this time.
Paul Fitzgerald was the defense attorney for one of Manson's followers.
Virtually every inmate in the state penitentiary wants to get out, and they're willing to modify their conduct in order to meet the standards of parole. But Manson knows deep down he's never going to get out of prison. He has told me as much.
In prison or out, Manson is lucky to be alive at all. He was originally sentenced to death, but in 1972 the death penalty was abolished in California, and his sentence was commuted to life. Just 5 years later, the death penalty was reinstated. William McBride was a juror in the trial of Manson and his followers.
I wasn't quite sure how I'd feel if they were really put to death, all 4 of them. So in kind of a funny way, maybe I was a little bit relieved.
Charles Manson is the best advertisement for the death penalty that we have, because he is a danger no matter where he is.
He comes up for parole, but they're going to deny it, so don't get worried. I mean, I would tell the public, I mean, no one's going to let him out.
We'll have to see if Paul Fitzgerald is right. The parole board's going to have to go through all this again as Charles Manson comes up for yet another parole hearing set for next Thursday. And we'll bring you that coverage live. Gregg, Jarrett, Charlie Manson. You look at him today, or as recently as those clips were taken in previous parole hearing, you look at him back then, doesn't look too dissimilar. In fact, doesn't sound too dissimilar.
You know, he offers a twisted form of intrigue. This guy is a whack job. He is nuttier than a fruitcake. He doesn't fit the legal nor the medical description of somebody who is mentally ill, although I am sure that he has scores of psychoses that some of yet haven't even been defined in the DSM-4R, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. But there's something that's in the psyche of the American public that has always been fascinated with notorious killers, serial killers, from Jeffrey Dahmer to Berkowitz to Charlie Manson, and even those who aren't mass killers but committed such heinous, terrible crimes, the political crimes, for example, of Sirhan Sirhan. We always watch them in their parole hearings because we want to know what makes them tick. What drives somebody to do something as cruel and atrocious and heinous as what Charlie Manson did?
And when we listen to what we've just heard from his last parole hearing about his talking, for example, about what he does, it's in the present tense. Well, I'm a Scotch drinker. I like a little wine with a meal. Well, peyote's okay.
Right.
And it sounds like he's in the present tense. It's only one of the parole board members who kind of straightens it out, saying, why are you getting that in prison? Where he says no. So his past becomes his present becomes his past. That's very scary.
He's delusional. You get a sense that he doesn't really quite have bearings on where he is, what he is, a sense of time. And of course, if you talk to people behind bars, and I know you have, you've talked to
many times.
Yeah, I mean, they lose a sense of awareness and of time and place, as to themselves and to everybody else and their surroundings as well. I mean, this is a guy, Charlie Manson, who is almost amusing in his delusions, as we heard it there in front of the parole board, and he knows he's not going to get out. He's doing just what Paul Fitzgerald said he was doing. He's spewing, hate and twisted thought just for entertainment. He's entertaining himself.
Right, he seems to be enjoying it very, very much so. Well, one of the other people, of course, involved in the Manson killings was Leslie Van Houten. She is quite a different person from both of the people we've looked at today. Mm-hmm. And we are going to be able to look at her after these breaks. But let me bring you up to date about where we are. We're in a verdict watch. The jury went out at 4:45 this afternoon in Brunswick, Georgia, in the Jackson case. Waiting to hear about that. And we want to hear from you at about 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We certainly think Charles Manson and his followers will cause you to have many a thought to share with us. So stay with us, please. We'll be back with more about Leslie Van Houten after these breaks. Welcome back to Court TV. I'm Rikki Klieman.
And I'm Gregg, Jarrett. Many people remember the summer of 1969 as a time of peace and a time of love. But they weren't all happy days. In August of that year, Charles Manson rocked the nation and Los Angeles with a killing spree that claimed 7 lives. But Manson didn't act alone. And today we have been following the parole hearing of Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the so-called family members. Her decision? Denied. She won't be up for reconsideration for another 5 years. But this last December, yet another Manson follower, Leslie Van Houten, had a parole hearing of her own. Here is a report on the fate of Leslie Van Houten.
I had Mrs. LaBianca lay down on the bed, and I don't remember putting the pillowcase over her head, but I'm sure that I did. And wrapped a lamp cord around her, and she began struggling as she heard her husband dying in the living room.
Leslie Van Houten is honest about the savage murders she participated in. A starkly different woman than she was back in 1969, under the influence of cult leader Charles Manson.
I cut people and I shoot them and I do whatever I have to do to survive in the world I live in.
Today, Manson is safely behind bars, but in 1969, he led a group of drugged-out middle-class teens.
One of the hardest things for me is when I discuss my life with Manson, because I do take responsibility for what I did.
What she did was participate in a weekend-long murder spree orchestrated by Manson. Van Houten was not there the first night, when actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, and 4 others were brutally killed. But the next night, August 10th, she helped murder Los Angeles businessman Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary.
Tex handed me a knife and he said, do something. And I stabbed Mrs. LaBianca in the lower torso. I think 16 times.
The infamous words, "death to pigs," were written in blood on the walls.
It was such a violent act. Once I started, I wasn't, able to stop. It was horrible. It was a horrible thing to do. And while I was doing it, I think I was fighting with myself.
Leslie Van Houten was convicted of 2 counts of murder. She and her fellow Manson family members narrowly escaped the gas chamber when California abolished the death penalty in 1972. This is her 11th bid for parole.
That I have redesigned my life, where I am a conscientious and caring human being.
Of all of Manson's followers, Van Houten may be the only one with a legitimate chance for parole. She's been a model prisoner, participating in self-help groups, completing college, and working to help others.
I think what we'll probably be doing is reading for adolescent girls that have seeing disabilities. I'm excited about that.
But a quarter-century of good behavior may not make up for one night of horror.
When Mrs. LaBianca heard him dying, she came forward, and I was trying to hold her down, and Pat attempted to stab her, and she hit the collarbone and the knife bent.
The parole board is also concerned with her past drug abuse.
From the first time I started drugs in my mid-15, I think, on, I really didn't get my life together at all. I look back and I can see Mr. K's right. I was having life handed me on a silver platter. I had people that loved me, and I had a lot more going for me than a lot of kids do.
Everyone says that I was the leader of those people, but I was actually a follower of the children because, I never grew up.
He's just a creep.
Van Houten makes clear her feelings about her former leader. In fact, she tells the board he wrote her threatening letters 2 years ago.
He was angry because I wasn't part of the cause anymore, that I had abandoned the only people that ever loved me.
What if Charles Manson got out the same week you did? And he called you up, and he said, we ought to talk about all this.
I'd go to the police department, and I would ask them to help me protect myself from him.
Do you believe you should be granted parole?
Yes.
Why?
Because I believe that with all of the factors taken into consideration, and the fact that I have been given the chance for a parole, that I could be a contributing member of society.
Lino and Rosemary LaBianca were 2 innocent people who were literally slaughtered in the supposed sanctity of their own home.
Stephen Kay was part of the prosecution team that locked up Charles Manson and his followers back in 1970. And more than a quarter century later, he's still trying to keep Leslie Van Houten behind bars.
She's had other good opportunities in her life, and she's turned away from them and turned towards evil. And society does not want to give her a chance again to get out and turn towards evil. If there ever comes a point when you decide that she should get out, you should be certain, for society's benefit and for your own benefit, that never again will she waver.
I believe I live my remorse. I take very seriously what I did, and I have worked very hard to ensure that the behaviors that led to the crime are no longer in existence.
That crime took place 27 years ago, but the board takes only 5 minutes to deny her parole.
Including that you're not suitable for parole, would pose an unreasonable risk of danger to society and affect the public safety if released from prison.
The decision comes as no surprise to Leslie Van Houten, who shows little reaction as she leaves the room.
I've known Leslie Van Houten since September of 1970. I always thought that she was charming. I'm sure that Lino and Rosemary LaBianca didn't think that she was too charming, but she's charmed people all her life. And she's still a very dangerous murderer, and somebody that we have to be very careful about ever letting her out in society.
So here's what we've seen. Today at her parole hearing, Patricia Krenwinkle doesn't even show up. Bad move. Very dumb move, quite unwise. Charlie Manson, during his parole hearing some time ago, appears with this sort of rambling stream of unconsciousness, illogical, incoherent sentences, delusions of grandeur. The man makes absolutely no sense. He is the poster child for somebody who should be behind bars for the rest of his life.